let's talk about pros. Cost is the big one, and immediately I can think of a counter argument, but let's just kind of look at these three together, the top three. So cost takes an awful lot of money and effort and procurement of capital to have that on-premise situation where you've got servers and networks and cables and people that have to be nearby to be on site if servers go down. And I do focus on servers a bit, but I'm talking about more than that, just the entire infrastructure of it. There is a lot to create and maintain and support though that infrastructure, especially when you talk about, okay, now it's been 3 to 5 years, now we have to go through a migration. Well, that's not just infrastructure people that have to go through that migration. It's software people too. It's everybody because now we all have to migrate all of our software and systems to new infrastructure and replace the old. And it's a big deal. It's time consuming. It's expensive. It involves a lot of man hours. So cost is one of the pros of migrating to cloud. Now, mobility is another. When you have things that are behind the firewall and internal to a company, it's hard to get at that from anywhere easily. Um, sure, if you're on a laptop and you're not physically at a location, you can get on the VPN and use things as if you were at the office. But these days, with so many things needing to be phone-based, and yes, you can flip a phone onto a VPN. I've tried it. I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult and cumbersome. I actually never got it to work. And people don't want to have to do that. They want to be able to, whip out the phone, hit either an app or a mobile web page or see an email and click that they want to do something. And it just gets done. And it gets done securely and not have to be physically on site or on a VPN or go through cumbersome channels. But of course, it's got to be secure. And then the third biggest pro to cloud is the scalability. If you've got a system, let's say you run an auction system and a website where, 6 days out of the week, it's got very low traffic, but then for, an hour on a Wednesday, it cranks up and you've got hundreds or thousands of people hitting that thing, or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, you can scale up for just that time and then scale things back down because the way cloud services work is everything is on a per minute cost. So if you have, for instance, a hotfix environment, let's say, that involves servers and other things that you don't need to spin up unless you've got some hotfix that you need to publish to test before you go to production with it. Well, it can be turned off when it's not needed. And let's say it's not needed for months at a time. And then, oh, you need it. You can spin it up, takes a handful of minutes, do your testing on it, and spin it back down. And you're only paying for the time that it's on. Or like I said with the first example, you could be paying a low amount of money day to day to have resources. How powerful are these web and database resources that we have out there? They're low during the week, and then let's say you come to a Wednesday and you put it on a thing where you expand them tenfold, 20-fold to really jack them up so that you can handle all the traffic and load of getting through an auction or whatever it is you may be doing on a Wednesday, and then bring them all back down and only pay for those elevated costs for those minutes that you have them up there. So other pros too, this one came from Information Age. I'm not going to read them off, but you can find pros and cons all over the place. But let's talk about cons and let's be realistic about them. So connectivity being one of them. So I always ask the question when any new technology comes about, well, why weren't we using this 20 years ago or 50 years ago? Connectivity being a big part of it. We now are a much more wired world where internet access is almost on all the time. And even in remote places, you've got mobile broadband overhead as, if not a primary, a backup. So you have a lot of connectivity in the world, but I have this listed as a con. And that is because if you have an app or service that's dependent upon internet connectivity, well, if you have a situation where you might not have connectivity all the time, that can be a big con that you need to account for. If you want to use the Uber app and you're out in the middle of a cornfield somewhere where there isn't mobile broadband even for, in range, you can't use Uber. You're probably not going to get someone out there anyway. But if your app or your website depends on connectivity, you've got to deal with that. And one of the ways that we'll talk about is through disconnected functionality, which introduces a new con. Because if you have a situation where, let's say you have a device and you go up to the office or you hook up to mobile broadband and you do a data sync, you download the data that you need to work with, and then you need to go off and work with that in a disconnected fashion, that's great that you can do that, saving the database locally on your device if you've got a software team that's built an application like that for you. And then when you're through, you've gone out for a couple of hours out onto the site that didn't have internet or mobile broadband to be able to ensure good connectivity back and forth. And then you go back up to the office or wherever good internet is and you do a data sync. Well, that's all well and good, but now you've got the new issue of data concurrency. What happens if a piece of information that got downloaded to your phone, let's say it was something that was a color that was blue, and you went off and did something and changed it to a red, but you didn't get back to sync it for 2 hours, and in those 2 hours, someone else, you didn't have a lock on that record, and someone changed it to a green, and what's going to happen now when you try to upload that record? So your software team has got a lot of work to do to figure out what to do when you have a conflict like that, where you have stale data that hasn't been freshly uploaded in a good bit of time. So, you'll often have background processes out when you're out in a place where you don't have good connection, where if it senses a signal, it'll go and do a data sync in the background. But there may be times where you don't have connectivity and you go an hour or two. So that is a con that you have to deal with. And then the third being entrenchment. So I've got a little bit of a problem with this being a con because you could make the argument that, okay, let's say we move all of our or most of our or a lot of our stuff to Microsoft's cloud. Well, boy, then they've really got you, right? Because they can lure you in with low costs, but then once you're in, like the Godfather, they're just going to flip that switch and double the prices and you're hosed, right? Well, yes, they could. And entrenchment is a con. I worked years ago for a very large paper company that the goal IT-wise was to get entrenched in our customer supply chain. Not that it was twisting of the mustache, but doing that at a loss to this company, to the paper company, to get in there, because knowing that if you're entrenched and the cost to switch is high for the customer, then you're going to be with them for the long term and you're going to be able to recover those costs and more if you become a permanent part of their supply chain. So there is that issue, but it's not unique to cloud. I mean, if you've got dozens of servers at your company already and you're all in on Microsoft Server physically on premises, well, and paying high license fees for that, well, you're kind of already entrenched. I mean, to switch your on-prem from a Microsoft to an Oracle, for instance, is really high. That's really high switching cost. So they kind of already have you there. And where you hope that whether it's on-prem or cloud, that you're going to be okay in the long run with cost is that there is competition. And while it could be difficult to detangle and move to another provider, that you could do it. And as long as there's competition out there, good, healthy competition, they would keep themselves all in check. So you would hope that that would be the case to deal with that con. So last question to ask is, why now? If you're a company or work for a company that's 0% cloud, 100% on-prem, and you're the IT provider for your users, is this something that you should do now? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's about 10 years old now. So it's a pretty well-established industry. Um, you know, Picking a provider, you've got your big three, you've got others. You obviously wouldn't want to pick a provider that has the chance to not be around 10 years from now, but it's a pretty formalized, well-established technology now. So kind of why not now? But you want to also balance that with what the needs of your organization are to make sure that you're picking and choosing the right things, not rushing, realizing those cons, making sure that you're accounting for security, especially because when you're doing things cloud, and while you could put things inside a virtual private network, even within the cloud, not necessarily your office closet, you could still do that because of the mobility I mentioned. You want a lot of use cases call for not doing that. You need to ensure security, doing things across the World Wide Web, making sure that you're designing things correctly as a software team to accommodate that. So I would challenge anyone who is considering it to do proof of concepts, work toward it, look at the advantages and the benefits of it, because it is here and it's here to stay. And there are a lot of benefits to be gained from going that way. So here and end at the presentation. I hope it was useful. I hope it explained things a little bit, and talk to you on the next one.